Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And friends, we are back in Calloway County with workers' compensation attorney Jeff Roberts. And Jeff has been practicing for over 32 years on workers' compensation and personal injury claims in general. Today, we're going to focus on construction accidents. Jeff, how you been?
I've been doing good, Jim. How about you?
Buddy, I'm doing fine. Good to see you. I know we promised the listeners last time that we'd be back in 2 weeks, and, well, here we are. So let's jump into construction accidents. It's been a while since we've spoken about this, but with spring and summer underway, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on. And this is going to be both commercial construction as well as residential home construction, but we're going to kind of stick in that area, if you will. But
sure.
Let's talk about, this is workers' compensation, right?
Yes, generally you're talking about workers' comp. There's potentially other cases there as well that we can touch on a little later on. But most of the time, whenever I'm contacted over somebody who's been injured on a construction site, it is normally a workers' compensation claim, potential third-party claim too, if somebody else was negligent in causing the injury.
Okay, and I know back in episode 103, we talked about forklift accidents, forklift injuries. A lot of times there are forklifts on a job site, so that could be related. So if you want to go back and listen to that episode specifically, I'll put a link in the show notes. Jeff, it's been a long time since we brought up this subject, but a lot of times on a job site, there may be somebody who is undocumented, and when it comes to workers' compensation, they're still eligible for benefits. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's their status in this country is irrelevant to whether they were injured on the job. So if they are here as a migrant worker, if they're here undocumented, or if they're a U.S. citizen, if you're injured on the job in Kentucky, you're going to be entitled to workers' compensation benefits from that standpoint. And, a lot of times, especially with the commercial construction, you see a lot of the union workers, the trade unions working on these sites, multiple unions working, trades working at the same time at times on these job sites. And I've represented a lot of union workers throughout my career. In fact, I had father and two brothers that were members of unions. So that is, you one of the things that you see with these is people that get injured and off work. A lot of, especially with the trade unions, they're very high wage earners, and trying to maximize their wage benefits and everything while they're off work is something that we have to work at, because workers' comp has a cap on the amount that they pay weekly for benefits. So that's where one of the things we try to do, again, I've said this in several episodes, short-term, long-term disability can be certainly beneficial in that regard. From there, especially for the high wage earners, having that extra layer of insurance protection there for you, because again, there is that cap under Kentucky law on what they're going to pay you for workers' comp benefits if you get injured on the job.
Right. And this is such a complicated area, but let's talk a little bit about the various types of injuries that you would typically see. I mean, a lot of times, you've mentioned that if somebody's in the carpentry trade, there is an amputation risk, right? If somebody's got a circular saw or some other kind of saw.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, during my career, I've represented people who've had amputations. I've, people using saws, and if there's a kickback, cut a finger off. I've had, unfortunately, some that's cut a hand off. Thankfully, they were able to have it reattached and have fairly good use from it. From that standpoint, but those type of injuries occur frequently. I've represented a lot of folks who've lost part of a finger or part of a hand because of, to some extent, unsafe work practices on the job site. Some employers, you don't see it as much with the skill saws and things of that nature, but in some sometimes they remove guards and things of that nature, and that can come into play and cause some very serious injuries for folks because they taken the protective equipment off of the machines. And with these type of injuries, a lot of times at a construction site, you will see some very serious injuries occur. Occasionally, it's a minor injury. People get cut and scrapes that don't turn into anything, thankfully. Sometimes you get infections from it, but you see a lot of these injuries where people have very significant injuries, have something dropped on them. I've had people who've lost part of their leg because of equipment being dropped on them and crushing their foot, and then they have to have an amputation from that. And so it's just that when you're on these job sites, there's dangers all around, and you get, and unfortunately, a lot of times people get injured through no fault of their own, and then they're the ones that have to live with the consequences, unfortunately.
And friends, quite some time ago, we recorded a couple of episodes on amputation and paralysis resulting from different types of injuries. I'll link to those in the show notes as well if you want to learn more specifically about those kind of cases. Again, just go to the show notes and click on that link. You can always find them on Jeff's website, jeffrobertslaw.com, or on Spotify or wherever you're listening to the podcast. So, Jeff, we talked about amputations. Another common area I would think would have to be just from heavy lifting, just lower back problems, lower back strains and things like that.
True. And what you'll see is, you'll have sometimes where they're doing heavy lifting and they'll have just a sudden onset of low back pain from lifting and a herniated disc or something of that nature in the back.
Feel a pop or something.
Yeah, exactly. And have to have surgery potentially from that because of herniated disc, pinching a nerve or something of that nature. But what I see also in here, and a lot of people don't realize that this is a compensable work injury, is wear and tear over doing these type of trades for years and years. If you are routinely lifting, heavy lumber, metal pipe, and things of that nature, routinely lifting that over and over and over again, you may not suffer one specific work injury, but what you're doing is you're wearing your back out. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as degenerative disc disease, or some people use the term arthritis, even though I don't know that that's the proper term for it. But anyway, you wear it out over doing that activity over a long period of time, and then it may be something fairly innocuous that causes or it may just come on spontaneously, where you just start having back pain, but then the doctors do an MRI and they look and say, your back is essentially worn out. And if it's because of heavy lifting in your career, especially it doesn't have to be construction injury, but heavy lifting in your career in the construction industry, then it very well may be a workers' compensation claim that you need to be dealing with from that perspective. And if it is, then there's certain requirements you have to make as far as providing notice to the employer and all of that, to be able to successfully pursue that workers' comp and get the workers' compensation benefits paid to you while you're off work, so that you do have some income coming in while you're off work recuperating from that injury.
Right. And back in episode 31, I love the fact that we've done so many of these episodes, I can always come back to it. Here's an episode. But in episode 31, we spoke specifically about cumulative trauma injuries. These are repetitive motion injuries. That was probably a little bit more in a manufacturing environment where you've got maybe an air tool or something else that you're working on. But again, it's the same thing. If you're doing these same motions over and over and you've got a career of this, those joints and those muscles they're just going to wear down over time. I mean, it's not just old age. It's actually probably, as you said, a compensatory injury. It's something you can get paid for through the workers' comp program.
Exactly. And you see, a lot of people think of it when, if they have carpal tunnel, you have people who type a lot develop carpal tunnel. And they all, everybody, when you think of carpal tunnel, and say, well, yeah, especially if somebody who types a lot, and say, well, yeah, that's from your work typing, and they don't really hesitate much about thinking about that being a work-related injury. But when it's an injury to your low back from lifting over and over and over, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Yeah, this you've just wore your back out. Your career is wore your back out. That's what's going on here," and they don't think, "Okay, well, this is a work-related injury because it's not from a one specific incident type situation," and that is and unfortunately, a lot of times they don't think about it or don't come talk to me until a long time after the fact. And I think I don't know what episode it was, but we talked about the obligation to give due and timely notice to the employer.
That duty to notify, right?
Yeah, duty to notify, and in that regard, and if you don't comply with that duty to notify within a reasonable time frame after you realize you've had a work-related injury, then that can cost you that claim. If you don't give due and timely notice, the judge will say you're not entitled to any workers' compensation benefits because you did not give due and timely notice of the claim to the employer. So that's one of the reasons, if you have any suspicion that your claim is that your problems are the result of work activities, that you should talk to an attorney, because if you have a potential claim there, you need to know that so that you can give your employer timely notice of that, so you don't cost yourself that claim just because of that not complying with that requirement of Kentucky law.
Yeah, and that's a big issue for us, and as you said, we've got episodes on that. So Jeff, we've talked obviously about lower back. We've talked about amputation and crush type injuries. I would think knees would be another area: twisted knees, torn ligaments, meniscus, all of that kind of stuff. Those are other painful things that can happen on a job site. You could step in a hole, you could step off a ledge on something, you could just twist it. I mean, but again, if you're on the job, you're doing your work activities, this is covered under workers' comp.
Correct. You're going to any joint is definitely subject to being injured. That's where, at least in my experience over 32 years, where most injuries occur is to a joint in the spine. Is one long joint, in my opinion, anyway. And so that's what I tend to see injured a lot. Now, occasionally you'll have, something falls on someone, it'll break a bone. So you do have broken bones at times. You have cuts. And those type of things that we've already talked about to some extent. But joints, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, all of those, you see those type of injuries, especially in the construction trades, because you're working overhead a lot, and you can tear a rotator cuff there, or you're walking over uneven terrain and stumble, trip, or twist. And then tear a ligament up in the knee or injure the hip in that regard. And unfortunately, those frequently end up resulting in surgery and a decent amount of time away from work, and making sure you're getting compensated for that. And most of the time, with the workers' comp check for your time off work, you get 2/3 of your average weekly wage. There's no taxes taken out, but most people, especially the higher wage earners, where they're hitting that cap, they struggle to take care of everything, and they get a little behind. They have to dip into the savings to make sure all the bills and everything are taken care of, and that's where having the attorney involved as well, to make sure that if you are entitled to permanent disability benefits, may just be permanent partial disability, but if you're entitled to permanent disability benefits under Kentucky workers' compensation law, they can get that for you. That will help to replenish the savings and put a little bit more in there to help compensate you for the injury that you've received.
Yeah. Let me transition a little bit here. We've been talking about different types of bodily injuries related to workers' comp on a job site, but back in episode 45, we talked about electrical injuries, and on a job site, a lot of times, if there's wire or if you're an electrician and you're doing stuff, the challenge of an electrical shock, maybe you thought you had the breaker thrown and somebody else, oh, hey, this is tripped, I'll go ahead and reset it for you, trying to do you a favor. Those kind of accidents, those kind of injuries can be extremely severe.
They can be extremely severe, and that can affect. Well, it can be deadly, but it can also affect multiple body organs from a electrical shock in that regard. And unfortunately, even though lockout tagout's been around for decades, now you still see some employers that do not require it and do not comply with lockout tagout, and don't train on it to some extent. And so if you're not doing lockout tagout, or you could do lockout tagout and then somebody else takes your lock off when they're not supposed to do that, and puts re-energizes that line, that can be it can be fatal, but it can cause serious injuries. And that type of situation we talked about earlier when about taking off safety equipment. If the employer commits an OSHA violation, a safety violation, that can increase the benefits that the injured worker is entitled to receive. If there's an OSHA violation or a safety violation, that could potentially result in the injured worker's benefits being increased by 30% for that safety violation. And so that's another benefit of going and talking to an attorney, because they can investigate whether there has been an OSHA violation or a safety violation. Even if OSHA didn't come in and do a citation, there can be a violation even though there's not a citation. And so the attorney can look into that to see if there was some sort of a violation that could result in that increased benefit to the injured worker.
Yeah. Earlier in this episode, you had mentioned people being injured by items falling from above. It could be a tool that falls off. It could be a piece of equipment. It could be some other material. Traumatic brain injuries are a definite risk. I mean, most of these job sites are hard hat type situations, but even at that, there are still injuries that can happen that can result in these what we call TBIs, these brain injuries, basically. Right. Episode 52, you did a deep dive on that topic as well.
Yeah, traumatic brain injuries. Unfortunately, I see traumatic brain injuries that aren't diagnosed early on anyway, because I think there's a couple of different reasons for that, to be honest. Some is the person's symptoms. They're not really realizing it as much, and so it's not being conveyed to the doctor, so the doctor doesn't know all the symptoms the person is having that could lead to the diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury. From that, unfortunately, some doctors are company doctors, and they're not really looking for all of that either in that regard. But traumatic brain injuries can be devastating to not only the person who suffers it, but to family members as well, because it can really alter a person's personality and how they react and how they act around other people. So.
Well, and that's interesting you said that, because a lot of times it may not be the person himself or herself that actually realizes something's going on, but their family members pick up on those signs. I mean, something's just not right with Dad, or something's not right with my husband or my wife. It just there's something's changed recently. And I remember they said something about an accident at work. Is it related? And sometimes the doc or even the attorney, like you, needs to kind of speak with both of them, right?
True, and I do that at times. There have been times where I've talked to the clients and knew that their injury was one that could potentially cause their traumatic brain injury. And I'll talk to them about things, and they may not know, but their spouse will be in here with them. And I'll see the look on their spouse's face. And frankly, there's a lot of times I've asked the spouse, are you comfortable talking with me honestly and forthrightly with them sitting here? Because if not, I've told the injured worker to leave so I could talk to the spouse some to get a better understanding of what was going on with my client from that standpoint, and then make sure they know, okay, you need to let the doctor know that these things are going on, that they're flying off the handle over things that didn't used to bother them, and they're being argumentative and they're yelling at the kids when they didn't do that before, and things like that. That is, and sometimes people think they chalk it up, so to speak, with, well, they're off work and they're stressed and that's what's going on, and it may be, but the doctor needs to know so that they can look to see if there's something else going on. If there has been a traumatic brain injury, that's taken place that needs to be addressed, and see if there's treatments that can be done to help ameliorate those symptoms or help to improve the condition, because the earlier it's treated, usually the better the end result is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, in just working the progression here, we talked about, some kind of injuries, and we talked about, electrical shock, which can be absolutely devastating, to traumatic brain injuries, to now, potential workplace fatalities. And that does happen on a construction site, unfortunately.
It does happen on construction site from there. And, Kentucky, in my opinion, just does not properly compensate for workplace fatalities. We have some good benefits from that standpoint. There is a lump sum death benefit that's paid to the estate anytime there is a workplace fatality. And then there are benefits paid to a surviving spouse and to surviving children, at least while they're minors, potentially could continue. If the child is incapable of self-support, then it can continue on into adult life, or if they're still in school, it can continue on. But those benefits are severely limited. So if you've got somebody who's a construction worker earning very good wages that dies in a work-related injury, the spouse in Kentucky gets 50% of the average weekly wage. Well, that is, if you've got a stay-at-home spouse who's home taking care of the kids, and then all of a sudden their income just got cut in half, that doesn't pay the bills. And to me, I never have understood why, if you have someone who's totally disabled, they get 2/3 of their average weekly wage untaxed. So it's about what their bring home pay is, which is what they ought to receive. I mean, they are totally disabled by the injury. They should be compensated what they were earning. There's no cost of living adjustment. There should be cost of living adjustments there, but there's not. But then you've got a spouse who dies, and then the surviving spouse only gets 50% of that, and it's like, in my opinion, that nowhere near properly. It does. I mean, there's no compensation for losing your spouse. Don't get me wrong. The money's not going to bring them back. But now you've got a spouse who was a stay-at-home parent. You've got kids who've lost their father or mother, and now the parent that's always been there taking care of them has to go out into the workplace, and they've got to go to a daycare, or they've got to go somewhere else from that standpoint, and lose that support system that they know the best in that. And, I've asked people why that is, and why they don't get at least 66 2/3% of the average weekly wage like a totally disabled worker does, because obviously someone who is deceased, there's no wages coming into the household anymore in that setting. Nobody's been able to give me a good answer.
Well, and the sad thing is, if you've got a stay-at-home spouse and that person's re-entering the job market, or just getting into the job market really for the first time in their full adult life, there's a chance they're not going to get a high-paying job. There may be a skills deficit or just work experience deficit. And now anybody that's had to put kids in daycare with babysitters, how expensive that is. And so now you've got a spouse who suddenly is dealing with that kind of an expense, plus a job that really doesn't pay anywhere near probably what the other spouse was earning. That can be just absolutely devastating. So, I mean, well stated. I appreciate your perspective on that.
Plus probably loss of insurance for them and their kids.
Yeah. It just keeps compounding, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And Jeff, then there's a situation, if the injury is severe enough, you may not be able to return to work. I mean, kind of what do you do at that point?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, if the injury is totally disabling, then you can get the temporary total, or you can get the total disability benefits, which is 66 2/3% of your average weekly wage. But there's also another safety net out there for workers, and that is the Social Security disability process. If because of the injury you are totally disabled, then you can file for Social Security disability benefits and potentially receive those. Obviously, Social Security makes its own determination on whether you're totally disabled. Workers' comp makes its determination, and they can differ. A workers' comp judge can say, yes, you're totally disabled. A Social Security judge say, no, you're not, or vice versa. But if both say you're disabled, then there is a coordination of benefits. So whatever you receive in workers' compensation would be taken into account by the Social Security Administration, and that may reduce how much Social Security disability you receive because of the offset provisions under the Social Security law that put you at a cap of what you can receive in combination of the two. From there, but there is that extra layer of protection that you can have. And one of the benefits of having an attorney, because a lot of times, with these injuries, you may not realize it's totally disabling until several months or a year down the road from that. If you have an attorney who's got the experience, they can get you started on that Social Security process to get that safety net in place before the insurance company cuts off that workers' compensation check as well.
No, I mean, it gets complicated, but then again, you're one of the attorneys, and there's not that many of you guys that handle personal injury, workers' comp, and Social Security, and you do all three, which is kind of it allows you to take this claim and look for every possible avenue for a benefit that may be able to help that worker and his or her family.
True, I do all of those, and it can be, frankly, there's been times when I've done all three in one, for one client in one injury type situation. That's not very often, but it has happened. But yeah, I've had clients who've had a work injury and because of that also had a Social Security disability or a car wreck and a workers' compensation claim, or a car wreck and a Social Security disability claim as well. And so both of those, or being familiar with all three of those, can be very beneficial to the clients at times.
That makes sense. Jeff, let's come back to something, and we mentioned this very early on in this episode, and that's when there may be another type of claim, and we've called this a third-party claim. We've talked about this before because, again, a job site's a very crowded situation. There's a lot of things going on. There's delivery people who are coming through. There are different union trades out there, different skilled trades out there, non-skilled trades, just a lot of activity there. And it may be somebody that you don't actually work with directly, but has caused an accident somehow. Maybe they run into you, maybe they bump into you, maybe they leave something open that should have been covered. But you end up in a situation where you've got your workers' comp claim because you were injured there, but now you also have the ability to file what's called a third-party claim. Do you want to explain that?
Sure.
That was a lot of words, man. I'm sorry about that. That was a lot of words.
That's okay. I knew where you were going, so I was good. In Kentucky and every other state, as far as I'm aware, with workers' compensation, you have what's called the exclusive remedy provision, which says that your exclusive remedy against your employer is workers' compensation. And the same applies to coworkers. So if your injury is because of the negligence of a coworker who works for your same employer, you cannot sue the employer for that negligence. You cannot sue the coworker for that negligence. If the negligence is from someone not associated with your employer, not an employee of your employer, then there's the potential for a third-party claim. There are others that are covered by that exclusive remedy provision. So if you work for a subcontractor and it's the negligence of a general contractor that contracted your employer, the subcontractor, you probably aren't going to be able to sue that general contractor because of what is in the industry referred to as up-the-ladder immunity. The general contractor, if your employer doesn't have workers' comp insurance, the general contractor's workers' comp insurance is obligated to cover your claim in that setting, and since they're potentially liable for workers' comp, they get the workers' comp exclusive remedy. But if it's another subcontractor, then you have that third-party claim. If you work for the general contractor and there's a subcontractor that causes your injury, you have a claim against that subcontractor for that negligence. Or it could be the potential that you're working at a facility, say you're working at a warehouse for Amazon. We're going to use that as an example. At an Amazon warehouse, and you're in there doing some electrical work or plumbing work or whatever it may be, and then an Amazon employee is who's negligent, then you may have the third-party claim against the Amazon or against Amazon for that injury as well. So there's the potential there for that. Now, when we say a third-party claim, that just means a party outside the workers' compensation claim. And then you have what would frequently be referred to as personal injury, a negligence personal injury claim that you could file and receive some of the same damages, the medical lost income type damages, which workers' comp would probably be entitled to be reimbursed on. But then that also opens up the claim for pain and suffering, which you cannot recover in workers' compensation, but you can recover in that other type of negligence claim. To be able to get that, you have to establish negligence, though.
Right. In episode 97, we actually spoke specifically about claim for pain and suffering. I think we also got into emotional distress or some other related injuries in there. But Jeff, this has been a pretty comprehensive discussion. I mean, there's a lot going on there, and I know we didn't get into really the vast array of types of injuries that could happen. But again, if you're on a job site, you're on a construction site, and you're involved in an accident, you've got workers' comp, there that should be able to help you. You may have Social Security disability if it's a full disability issue, and then you could also have personal injury coming in to help with not only pain and suffering but also just a general third party claim. So, the good news is, Jeff, once again, you handle all three of those kind of claims, which is kind of interesting. And you've actually got two offices, right?
I do. I have my office in Murray, Kentucky. I've been here in Murray for 32 years. I started practices in Murray. In 2023, I opened up an office in Hopkinsville as well. So I have both offices to be able to better assist my clients.
And if it's a workers' comp claim, if it's a personal injury claim, including motor vehicle accidents, you can handle those claims anywhere in Kentucky, right?
Correct. I handle workers' comp and personal injury cases all over Kentucky. Yes.
In fact, you're going to be speaking at a conference of your peers, your fellow attorneys, as part of the Kentucky Justice Association. And I know in the previous episode we talked about this a little bit, but you're going to be talking about a workers' comp related claim that has to do with a motor vehicle. So really a third party action, correct?
Well, I'm going to be talking about if your client has a personal injury, a car wreck case, and a workers' compensation claim, what does the attorney need to do to coordinate to maximize the recovery for their clients?
Outstanding. Yes. So, friends, if you've been listening to this, you've been hurt on the job, and you're trying to figure out, okay, look, I need to first of all understand what my rights are and try to find an attorney that can represent me. Jeff, you've got one phone number, regardless of which office they want to go to. You've got one phone number.
Correct. One number, 270-753-0053 or 1-800-844-5108. Call either of those numbers, and you will, if it's during regular business hours, you will most likely have a live person answer the phone. From there, that is the best way to get in touch with me, is to call that number from there. And then I also have my website that you can it's got to contact me, or you can email me at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com as well. But again, the best way is to call.
Outstanding. Jeff, you've got a motto here in the office, and I know you've covered a lot of cases in 32 years, but you've kind of distilled it down to a way you and your entire team kind of approach these.
Well, I think if you have a motto, if you want, or if you have a goal that you always strive for, it helps keep know what you're going to be focused on. It helps your staff from that standpoint. So I do have that, and it is that we provide small town service and deliver big city results. We try to do that in every case that we have. We want to make sure when we represent a client, if they have any questions, that we're answering those questions. We're keeping them informed of what's going on. We're providing that personal service to them, and also that we are delivering on the results that they should be receiving for their claim.
Outstanding. Jeff, it's been a pleasure, buddy, and I look forward to talking to you here in another couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.